Okay, so the game is 1830. This is high on the requests thumbs, maybe not at the very highest level, but I wanted to do something that wouldn't require me to learn rules, and so I'm working on a set right now that I want to get out soon, and it wouldn't take a long time for pretty much the same reason. This is something I've kind of been a little leery of putting up for a number of reasons. One, I did 18AL already, and really they're almost exactly the same game. And there's kind of this, geez, I should do one of the other 18XXs. Yes, I did 61, but I'm thinking 56. Or there's a lot of other ones that have a lot of different flavor. 18AL is really kind of like a slightly mellowed version of 1830. 1830 is a pretty light XX game in terms of the total amount of, rules, etc. there are in it. However, to me, this was sort of the seminal one, and so I kind of understand why people want to look at it. And not sure if it's my favorite or not. Let's take a look at how the rules work, and I'll try to cover most of the basic systems, because although I'm pretty sure I did it in 18AL, that was very early on, and I don't know, maybe I'm even less comprehensible there than I am now. All right, so the goal of this game, it's a financial game, and the goal is to be the guy with the most money at the end of it. The game will end in one of a couple of different ways. One is when the bank runs out, and my bank is actually a little short. I'm going to say the hell with that. It's unlikely to make a difference. I think it's like $30 short or something like that. It's unlikely. My friend Kevin, long ago, told me that it may have lost more since then. Anyway, that's one way to end the game, is if the bank itself runs out of money, if enough money's gone to the players that the bank ever goes where it has to, make up new money for people, the game will end at the end of that period. The alternative in this, and the only alternative, there's no, trying to remember, some of the games end if a price gets high enough, and I'm pretty sure that's not the case here. No. Okay, so the other alternative for ending the game is if a player runs out of money. Now you may say, well, wait, shouldn't the other players have a chance? No, that's actually one of the mechanisms in the game that's very key to it, is that if you can target someone hard enough, you can end the game early and maybe make early gains that wouldn't sustain key. Now, that can be a problem, and maybe I'll touch on that in the review. Who knows? Okay. So, at the beginning of the game, everybody splits. There's $2,400, and you split that by the number of players there are. I'm going to play a 6-player game, so that's $400 each. That's not a lot of money. Some people like to play it better in, say, 4 players, where they have enough money to really kind of start their own thing and do it themselves. I find that 5 or 6 is more interesting. Well, 6 predominantly. Because it requires a certain level of cooperation at the beginning of the game, of some sort or another. But it's very self-interested cooperation. Like any XX game, the game splits into stock rounds and operating rounds. And in 1830, you're going to have a stock round where players take turns buying and selling shares, punctuated by a series of operating rounds, and this is pretty standard. At the beginning of the game, though, there's only one operating round. Once the 3 trains come out, there'll be 2 operating rounds in between each stock round, and then finally when the 5s come out, there'll be 3. And those are big game shifters, but there's effects that come out when every new train comes out. Okay. At the first stock round of the game, nobody's got anything except a pile of cash, and there are these private companies available. Now, the way private companies work in the 1830 line of games, and that includes 18AL and most of the games, they all have to be sold for the game to really kind of start. Now, the way this works is it's an auction. This guy's going to be the first player, and I'll be going counterclockwise as I always do, just to be special. He's got an option to put a bid in on any of these companies. Or he could buy the first available company, or he could do neither of those and just pass. If you put a bid in, what you're saying is once all the railroads above that have sold, you're locked into an auction for that company. Of course, you can always just buy the first company, and if this were a 5-player game, my friend Nick pointed out, you always want to buy the first company in a 5-player game because it guarantees you 2 companies. There's no way that you can avoid getting 2 companies unless people are really, really intransigent, and I think you have to actually help them. So you're pretty much guaranteed 2 companies. They may not be the best 2. This one's not terribly good, and the other one you end up with is probably going to be the one that no one else wanted. And the reason that works that way, if you buy one, well, if everybody else buys one, you get one. If people bid on one and use up their uses, you can buy one above their bid, or you can put a bid in on one above their bid, and you're almost guaranteed. There is a case where if everybody's interested in bidding on companies, you may not be absolutely guaranteed 2 companies, but chances are they don't have enough money to set it up correctly, and you're going to get your 2 as the first player. Okay, I've never seen it not happen. So the way this works, let's see, right. If you buy it, then the next one's offered to the next player. If you just put a bid, the next player gets the same option, buy or bid on one of the remaining ones. The bids have to be at least $5 more than the previous bid. And they have to, I believe, be at least $5 more than the par price on them. Yes. So the only chance you have of getting them at face value is when they're just offered to you. There's a special case if no one does anything. The value of the Sucky Valley here drops by $5 and everybody's given another shot. That never happened, but we used to misplay that in a different sort of way. Okay. Let's see. So then after all the privates are out, and 2 of them, they each come with their own special abilities. Let's look at some of those. First of all, some of them, like the Sucky Valley here, has a hex associated with it. And that just means that nobody can build in that hex until a certain period occurs. And there's limitations on it. So like you have to actually have a corporation owning it to build in it, and then eventually when they dry up, anybody can build in them. Champlain and St. Lawrence allows you an extra free tile lay, which becomes important. You'll see how that works. Delaware and Hudson allows you a free, I think it's just a free token, but it may be a free token and a tile lay. Let's see, we've got a little connection of all of these. Now you're allowed to lay the tile as well. Mohawk and Hudson is just controlling the space, but it comes with a special ability, which is that you can trade it in for a share of the New York Central. And that's kind of a valuable situation because the value of these do not increase, but the value of corporations will change over time. In fact, these just become worth nothing at some point. But you have the option to sell them to a corporation. The Camden and Amboy comes with a free certificate of the Pennsylvania Railroad. which is liable to get started because of that free certificate. Especially in 6 players, it's likely to happen. But even in lower numbers, the fact that you have that extra certificate. And the Baltimore and Ohio comes with the President's Certificate of the B&O Railroad, which gives you significant control over whether or not that's going to be running properly. How exactly that works is dependent. You have to understand the rules a little bit. But this is an interesting one because you're paying $220 for shares that essentially are worth only slightly more than that. If you're allowed to set the price of the Baltimore and Ohio, and if you set it at $100, the 2 shares that you get with the President's Certificate are worth $200. So you've already paid $20 more. Now, your bonus here is you get the revenue immediately. All right. Most of the other corporations seem very, very good, though, in a lot of different ways. And we'll see why that is. And especially at the high end, they're very valuable because you're able to use them to steal money from your corporation's treasury. Okay. Once those are all sold, the next person in stock round order is offered the right to start buying certificates. Now, the first thing that happens is when the B&O is sold, the owner of that sets its price. And this is largely how presidencies are set anyway. He picks a par value, and usually the B&O's owner is going to pick 100 so he doesn't lose too much money. He takes the 2 certificates, and he'll put a little disc up here. I've got these guys here, which show the current price of the market. One of those will be there. The rest are for station tokens, which we'll look at in a while. So the first person after the final stock certificate falls, or final private company falls, can start a company, or he can buy a share of an already started company. In the case of a started company at the beginning, that's only going to be the B&O. And so his option is either buy 2 shares, 1 certificate of another corporation and set its par value, paying the price for 2 shares at that par value, and the price just goes to the bank, or buying 1 share of the Baltimore and Ohio at the price that it's at. And everybody's going to be given this option going around in circles until everyone passes. If everyone in order passes, the first person who passes gets this little thing, which is very, very important. It says, on the next stock round, I get the first action, which means if there's a corporation open you want to start and you finally have money to do so, or if something's just been raped heavily and it's a horrible investment, you can dump your certificates of it. In terms of the company that's not yet started, you can't. You got to buy them. Anyway, so with the 6-player game, for the most part, except for the Pennsylvania, which 1 share is out with the CNA, and the B&O, it's impossible to float a company with your $400. Because 67, let me explain that in a minute, but 67 times 6 is $402. It takes 6 shares, the President's Certificate and 3 others, right? No, 4 others, to float the company, to allow it to operate, to make it able to make any money at all, do anything. So it requires some cooperation of some sort to get anything out there. So now the guy who bought the B&O has spent $220 of his dollars on that. He can't float the B&O on his own, but other people can do it for him. The guy who bought the share, the Camden and Amboy, which came with the Penn share, can't float it because he spent money. And here's the thing. Everybody's probably bought one of these, or nearly everyone has, in which case they don't have even close to that 402. They can't just sit on their money and say, I want to, start a corporation. All right. You can still buy the shares in the corporation, but they're not going to make you money. So in general, you don't want to sit on shares of a corporation that's unstarted, unfloated. Now, once some corporations are floated, eventually everyone's going to pass and the stock round ends and we go to the operating round. And in the operating round, the corporations get to take their actions. Now, for them, they'll be operating in terms of value. The highest valued corporation on the stock market that is floated, i.e. has that 6 shares out, and those shares just have to have sold out of here. They could end up back here in the bank pool. On the first turn, you're not allowed to sell certificates back to the bank pool, but later you will be. And in fact, I should have explained that in my description of stock rounds. During the stock round, if you wish, you can sell certificates of corporations. You can also cut deals to sell these between players at any agreed upon price. That doesn't happen very often, but I've seen it a couple of times. With the certificates to sell them to the bank pool, okay, the way that works, skipping back away from the operating rounds, the way that works is you select however many certificates you want to sell. Now, there can't be more than 50% of the corporation in the bank pool at any one time in this game. So if there's already 2 shares in there, you can't sell more than 3. There's another proviso. If you own the presidency, you can't sell the president's share unless there's someone who can take it who has 2 shares of the corporation already. And that will fall on the person next in line. Well, the person with the most shares who happens to be next in line. So if 2 people have 2 shares, you would go to the next one in the line of that. But if one person has 3 and one has 2, the person with 3 automatically gets it, at least temporarily. The price when you sell a share drops by a number of rows equal to the number of shares that you just sold. Now, this could obviously, create some kind of really chaotic market mechanisms if people could just buy and sell shares as they like. All right? So there's a limitation. Once you sell a share of a corporation, you can't buy it back during that stock round. A few other little specials. Stocks over here are always sold at the par value. Stocks in here are always are bought at par value or whatever. Stocks in here are always bought out of there at the current market price. Selling is at the current market price before the price goes down. Now, end of the stock round. What happens? Well, if the entirety of the stock is sold out and held by players, if all 10 shares are held by the players, the value of the stock, and let's put a little marker here just to help us understand what's going on. The value of the stock will rise 1 level. It becomes more worthwhile to own because the public perception is that it's a good stock. Okay, during the operating rounds for a corporation, and maybe you're going to want to watch some of the playthrough to kind of get a feel for how this works if you're not familiar with XX. And frankly, if you're familiar with XX, you don't need to hear this at all, right? Okay. During the first operating round of a corporation, it's just sold at 60%, it's out there. Well, it takes its little, treasury marker or whatever. This is the wrong one for that country or company. It'll take all the tokens and place them along here. One of those tokens goes in its starting location. All right. Then it's allowed to lay track. And it can lay track from its starting location. And it's allowed to lay 1 yellow piece on a space that doesn't have yellow. That's it. Very interesting. So if I had the NYC, I could drop a piece here. If I was starting with, say, the pen, I'd put my starting token down and I could lay some track. And I'll lay myself a piece of track heading towards New York. Some track costs money to pay, to build. It has the first time you build track in that area, you have to pay that much cash out of your corporation treasury. Hey, how did I get money in here? Okay, well, when you start a company, when you float a company, the treasury for that corporation is equal to 10 times the value of the shares that the par value of the shares. So if you start something at $100, there's $1,000 in your treasury. Wow, lots of money. Cool. Yeah, but you're not going to get more as shares sell further out. And that's one issue in this game where the stock market takes a certain view. Okay. After you lay your track, you have the right to buy a token. You can buy a token in an area that you connect to. So for example, the pen would connect to there. And we could lay another green token, I don't want to pop another one out, over here, and you'd be paying $40 for your first one and $100 for each additional. Of course, there's free token available here for the NYC. Whoop, whoop, whoop. No, I'm sorry, for the D&H here. Getting myself confused. Okay. After you lay your token, you're allowed to run trains. What trains? Yeah, you don't have one the first time you run. When a company starts. But you might have, once you have one, what you do is you connect cities with trains. Now the number on the train is how many cities you can connect. What's a D? Yeah, that's as many as you like, but you can only go through each one once. And that's a rule. Each train can only go through each city once. All your trains can only run over a specific section of track once. So I couldn't run a train, I couldn't run more than one train over a single section of track is basically what I'm saying here. And it's hard to explain showing the diagram, but it's actually possible to get yourself confused even when the track layouts are complicated enough that can be an issue, because we have these other colored tracks which come in later. Okay, and where else are we? Right. Okay, so you can run two trains between the same cities, though, under some circumstances. So, for example, if I had a train that ran from here to here, I could also slip one around this way and run it from here to here. Of course, it would take a bigger train. It would take a 1, 2, it would take a 1, 2, 3 train and only a 2 train to do this. Anyway, you add up the value of the cities. These guys are 20, these guys are 10. On some of the later track, they get higher. These things are considered cities, except you can't put a dot in them. You can't put a station marker in them. These red things count as cities. They're sort of endpoints. You can't run through them, but they can be an endpoint in your track. Restrictions on your routes. There has to be a dot on your route from your corporation. There can be no cities that are completely filled with only opposing companies. Well, not opposing, but only other companies' dots. Okay, so putting dots in places can block people from traveling between different spaces through cities, although they can use them as endpoints. And you add up all the money all your trains make, and then you have this option of what you want to do with the money. You can swallow the money, in which case your stock value goes back a space, okay? And the money goes into your company treasury. This is the way to get cash back into your treasury. You could also pay out your money, your income, pay out the dividends, in which case the stock value goes up to the right, and there's special edge case situations. So if you're here and you go up, you bump up. If you're here and you go down, you bump down, whatever. Okay. Those edge cases don't apply on stock sales, though, for example. So, like, if you're here and you sell 3 shares, it only goes down to here. I think this one, if you're up on the top row and you've sold out, I think you just don't gain. In some games, you shift to the right like this. But I don't think that's the case in this one. All right. Let's see where we are. Right. So if you pay out the dividends, every share produces 1/10 of what you produced. So let's say I made this run here between these two and I made $30. I could pay out $3 a share, And everybody who owns a share of the Pennsylvania gets $3. The bank pool also produces money. That goes into the corporation treasury. Now, this is different in each game, and it's really a view of how you want to look at who owns what. So, in this game, the bank pool, I'm not sure what that's representing in terms of getting the money back into the corporations, but the shares here are held by your lender. I'm going to split the vid here and put up an... all right. So, after you choose to pay out your dividends or swallow them into your treasury, now you can buy, and if you couldn't run a train at all, like on the first round, you are automatically assumed to have swallowed. You have to produce dividends to pay them out. You're now offered the opportunity to buy some trains. And this is one of the interesting things in this game, because the trains represent time. So at the beginning of the game, there's a limit, and throughout the game, there's a limit to how many trains you're allowed. Initially 4 trains per corporation, and you're only allowed to use yellow tiles. But you can buy 4 of these 2 trains right off the bat. You don't even have to have the way to run them. You could be considering other alternative uses for those trains, including hurrying time along. When the 3 trains come out, green tiles become available, and they'll upgrade cities and create some forkings on here. You'll see them as they play. They have to maintain, when they're laid down, they have to maintain the current track lays, however. So you couldn't, delete track with them in this version. Okay. There will be 2 operating rounds between stock rounds when the 3 trains come out. And at this point, private companies can be sold to your corporations. Now, how does that work? Well, during your corporation's operating round, it's allowed to purchase a private company from a player for anywhere from half to twice the value of that company. There's one exception. The Baltimore and Ohio is not allowed to be sold to a corporation. But that means that you can turn this into $320 of corporation cash just before it's going to disappear. Yeah, we haven't gotten there yet, but they do disappear. That's just pocketing investor money, as it were, and is one of the really cool aspects of this game. And it, of course, also damages that corporation greatly, not directly on the stock market, but the effect may be that people start dumping shares, including perhaps the person who owns it and sold it that. And that is raping a company. When the 4 train comes out, it destroys all the 2 trains, which could leave corporations without a train, unable to produce income, going back on the track over there. And if you have no train on a corporation, for whatever reason, and it connects to a city, its starting space connects to a city, it must buy a train. And it must figure out how to buy a train. It could have to buy one from here, or it could buy one from another player. Corporations on their turn at this point are allowed to buy a train from another corporation for any amount that they can agree to, not less than $1. The money has to change hands solely between corporation treasuries in that case, though. You can also buy trains that end up in the bank pool. That's a kind of odd circumstance that can happen. We'll see how that occurs in a moment, because when the first 4 train comes out, railroads are limited to 3 trains. Now assume that I had a corporation with 4 3 trains on it. This is a bad idea, a very bad idea. Well, one of the 3 trains would get discarded into the bank pool and be available as the cheapest train available at $180. Now, if you don't have enough cash and you can't figure out how to buy a train from someone else, like one of your own corporations or something, then you must buy the cheapest possible train that you can, you must buy a train you can afford. If you don't have the cash to buy one of these trains, you must buy the cheapest possible one. You pay all the corporation's money, and then you pay the rest out of your own pocket. As the president of the corporation, you're responsible for keeping a train on it. If you don't have the cash on hand for this, you're allowed to sell stocks. In fact, you must sell stocks in order to raise that capital. If due to the rules of the game. For example, the bank pool holds 50% of your corporation or whatever. You can't sell enough stocks to raise the capital for the trade. You are bankrupt, and the game is over. A lot of games with new players end in a bankruptcy. This is because it's sometimes hard to understand what's risky, what trains are coming out. Am I in danger? I've seen that happen. Much, much more likely, I just sold the Camden and Amboy to my Pennsylvania Railroad, and now you own the Pennsylvania Railroad with no money. That's really the way that newer players get hit hard. But from what I understand at the WBC, the first couple rounds of it, and there's only 3, there's usually somebody at the table who is incompetent enough that they let themselves get bankrupted, which is one reason why I'm not terribly impressed with it. It's hard to plan for what kind of game you're going to be playing if there are people who can go bankrupt at the table easily. Okay. With the 5 trains, that brings out the brown tiles. These are the final tiles. They can only be They only upgrade green tiles. And by the way, these are yellow already. They are upgraded by green tiles. These are unplayable. They've got fixed things. All private companies disappear. If you didn't deal with your private company yet, you have lost its ability. And this is really most important with the ones that have some special abilities, and especially these guys that you could sell for a big ton of money to a corporation. You're giving away a lot of your power if you just hold on to the private company and you don't get this big cash outflow. These trains are, let's keep looking here. After the next stock market round, we're going to have 3 operating rounds between stock market rounds. Each railroad is limited to only 2 trains at this point, which is the reason why it's not good to have 3 trains. 3 trains haven't been destroyed yet. They don't play out as well as you'd think they would to have a lot of them, and they're kind of a risky opportunity. Higher revenue now is played on the value. So these guys pay out only the top value, like $40 a round, but now they'll shift to $70 a round from the 5 train on. And these are the first permanent train. Nothing will destroy these. So it's often the case the person who's going to win the game ends up setting themselves up so that they can own a significant number of these, because they're fairly cheap compared to the other permanent trains, and you can own more trains. And the way to make the biggest profits in this game for your revenue, your dividends money, is to have lots of trains on companies that hit good cities. And that's kind of what you're going to be aiming to do. The 6 train is kind of weird too. It kills all the 3 trains, and now when the first 6 goes, from then on people can buy the diesel. The diesel is a special case too. It'll destroy all the 4 trains, but the first person who buys one, if they have a 4 train on the corporation they're buying it, well, if anyone has a train on a corporation when they buy the diesel, they can trade that train in and buy the diesel for only $800. That's not usually a good idea with a 5 or 6 train, although occasionally you might have so much money on a company and an extra train that you trade up for a diesel. And then it goes into the bank pool. But the person who has the first diesel opportunity to buy, the person who buys the first diesel, if they're using a 4 train, they get the value of the 4 train right off the price of the diesel. That's often one of the goals in the game, is to try to convert a 4 train into the first diesel. Now, I found that that's hard to judge, among other things. In fact, maybe harder to judge or engineer than trying to get 2 5 trains or a 5 and a 6 train. And it's also not as valuable. But whatever. Some people probably play in that direction. I think we've gone over almost everything. There are certainly some specifics that I've missed. There's one. So there's a limit to the number of certificates you can hold. And let's see where that is. We got a copy of it up here. So based on the number of players, you're allowed only a certain number of certificates. Now, a president's certificate counts as one, even though there's 2 shares. Private companies in your hand count as certificates, but not in the corporation. By the way, once a corporation buys a private company, it will never change hands again. There's a lot of XX games that have a lot of funky little additional rules to them. This is pretty much your pure vanilla XX. There's a lot of opportunity to be really, really harsh in this. It blew my mind in the sense of just, people thinking they're doing very well, and they ended up holding 2 shares of a corporation at the wrong time. In general, the rule should be, in your own mind, I will not hold 2 shares of a corporation I'm not president of, unless I know that it's safe. I have to fully understand that it's safe. And that's really, to me, the division between someone who is sort of, that's sort of the minimal level of competence. If you can't do that, if you're going to hold shares in the thoughts that somebody might not destroy a corporation and hurt you and wreck your chances, then you probably don't understand the game well enough to be playing it very competitively. And that's fine. It's just that one little rule is the first step towards making some understanding of the game. Now, there are times when you will look and say, I don't feel absolutely safe, but I'm not in the lead, and it would hurt my opponent to destroy his own company, even if he's putting cash in his own pocket. So I feel safe. And that's, occasionally you'll see people go down in a bankruptcy who are even very competent people, just because maybe they misjudged the value at hand. One important thing about this is I believe cash in pocket is secret. I'm not sure about cash in the corporate stock map. I'll have to look at that. I know cash in hand is secret. You could track all this. Now, I used this argument. I could track all the money if I had pencil and paper. So I know what everybody has. Now, do you want to spend the effort with me doing that? And that was my argument for why we would use all open money and all written down and everything. It slowed the game down tremendously. Everybody was taking too much time thinking, and it completely hit me with analysis paralysis. So we went back to, okay, let's try to make the rules as written work. How much money is there in a person's hand? Well, what if I can't know that? All right, the answer became you can't keep track of stuff on paper and pencil or on a calculator or anything like that. And it just sped things up so tremendously. We were just handing out cash all the time. And it really improved the game back to how I remembered it being. So there was kind of this stale period where, every decision we had too much information to go on. And then switching it to just the gut feeling. Yeah, I think I can do this. I think I can get away with this. Instead of calculating it out all the time was a real enlightening experience. So that's one thing I want to suggest to anybody playing is really consider playing by the rules with the hidden money, because you start knowing too much and it's just way too calculable in terms of, can I get away? Will I be the guy who gets the 2 trains that I want? Very easy to do.